If I was going to write a book on sales, for everything I've learned, I could get it down to one sentence, which is, it's very difficult to win a deal as an outsider looking in. And to me, that's the difference between somebody who's got insider status. That's the turning point where it becomes you're mutually discovering things together. Before that, the customer is keeping you out. It's essentially a test. Who is it I want to spend my time with? Because I don't have time to give equal time to 3, 4, 5, however many vendors.
Welcome back to the Thoughts on Selling podcast. Today it is my absolute pleasure to have Pete Smith join me to talk about all things sales enablement. Welcome aboard, Pete.
Thanks, Lee.
So, first question, Pete. Who is Pete Smith?
Pete is a sales guy from the day he got out of college. Here we are a few decades later. A few years ago, I had built a tool for myself to help me sell an increasingly complex market space. And I used it, and I walked out, and I viscerally knew that I was twice as effective as I was the day before because of using this technology. That's sort of when I got into this idea of there is this sort of partnership you can have with technology if it's built the right way.
As a force multiplier.
Right, exactly. And so originally I was just going to keep using this myself. And I've got a couple of CEO friends I showed it to, and they're like, "What are you, stupid?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's why I made the tool." They said, "No, everybody has this problem of trying to understand the customer and their needs at depth, getting to a sort of a critical mass of understanding of the customer and their needs. And so you should start a company." I'm like, "I don't want to do that. That's way too much work." And they said, no, you don't understand. You're going to go do this. And so they even set me up with potential investors, and I started having meetings with them and on the screen with me, helping me along. So that's who I am and what we're doing. And now I'm really focused on this problem of Gen Z entering a workforce where companies believe that they can just do without entry-level employees and apply AI to that. And, in some cases, like commodity product sales, they're certainly right. But at the other end of the spectrum, which I think is sort of the future of sales, this sort of complex, multi-stakeholder, novel decisions or transformational decisions, don't ask Gen AI to make that decision for you. There's some big gaps in applying AI to that problem. And so that's kind of what has my focus now, is sort of trying to shoot in front of the duck, right? And where's all this going to be in 2 or 3 years? And how do we have something that's valuable then?
Yeah, and to that end, you and I met prior to the National Intercollegiate Sales Competition that Stephanie Boyer hosts at Bryant University, where 300 some odd college students from around the country, and I think it's just national, from around the country come to compete on sales skills, speed selling, and then a 4-step process of meeting with the sales enablement manager. In this case, in November, the sales enablement manager, the sales manager, the CFO, and then the head of revenue ops. And so we saw 300 some odd students, college students, come through with a varying level of sales skills, and many of them pretty damn good in that competition. And kudos to you, Pete. You did a fabulous job preparing the participants with the full case study of SpotLogic. I was very impressed. As someone selling a sales enablement tool, you did a darn good job of providing the sales enablement for that sales enablement tool.
Thank you. The thing that I put SpotLogic, actually, I was called into a very big company about a year ago, and they said, from what we've heard, we need SpotLogic. And I'm like, this company sold a lot of simplistic products compared to what I've been used to in my career. But they have a lot of younger, reps, so less experience. And I went into the meeting and I said, I didn't make this product for
you.
Well, yeah, it just seems like this is a product sale, and I'm sort of more focused on complex solutions and trying to simplify things in that space. And they said, "No, you don't understand. We don't have like one of these things. Each rep's got 20 to 40 products. So there's a different type of complexity that they have to deal with." And in the sales contest, a different type of complexity was these different buyer personas that you're talking about. And in my mind, there was very little overlap between the conversations of each of these 4. So there's complexity everywhere, seems like, in sales. And to the extent that we can simplify it, then we can take some of the cognitive load off of salespeople and let them listen like you were talking to me about earlier, like picking up on cues that aren't part of the conversation itself, but, sort of metadata around, somebody just walks in the room and things are different all of a sudden, not something you could have predicted, doesn't fit a pattern you've seen before, and how do you respond?
Yeah, well, if you've been practicing improv for a while, you know exactly how to respond, right?
Yes, and yeah.
You just do. So one of my favorite sales books is The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And as you were describing your first conversation with that large company, agreement number 3 is don't make assumptions. And his son, I think it's Don Jose Ruiz, wrote the 5th agreement, which is be skeptical, but be open. With the 2 Ruizes on your shoulders, you would have had an entirely different conversation. Oh, sure, this is perfect for you. How many do you want? Sign here.
What took you so long? Yeah.
Press hard, you're making 3 copies. So that very brief overview of your history, let's take a deeper dive into it. What's the question I want to ask? So I'm passionate about sales enablement. I've been in sales enablement since it was called sales support, right? Long before it was called sales enablement. Oh, by the way, do you know the first known artifact, when the first known artifact of sales enablement was created?
That was NCR, right?
Yes, you're up on it. Yeah.
Well, that's where I went to work after college. So
I think you and I might have talked about this. I tell people the first known instance is in the 80s. And people go, that's a long time ago, the 1880s.
Yeah, they called it Sugar Camp. And it's this university to teach salespeople how to sell. Back in the day, I was there for 6 months. And they taught you how to dress. It was career guidance more than just how to be a salesperson. You were an extension of their brand, and they were guaranteeing essentially a level of quality going out the door. Like, even when I was done with training, I couldn't call on a customer myself for another 6 months without my senior there with me. They were very, very concerned about the quality of the customer relationship. And
we need to get back to that.
Yeah.
Here's a funny story. Many years ago, back before Sun was acquired by Oracle, the Sun enablement team said to the Sun Salesforce, y'all know what works. Why don't each of you create short videos to share amongst one another, like share the tribal knowledge? And so a bunch of videos got created and passed around. And some of these videos were shared to partners. And then a memo went out. When you're creating these videos, please do not be wearing pajamas.
Well, a lot of those guys that were at Sun came from NCR, and I think they were just ready to get out of the white shirt and the red tie and the suit. They may have taken it too far.
It wasn't a guy.
No comment.
And I don't have the original video, so I can't say anything more. But in today's world, socks are the new tie. Right. So nobody wears ties anymore. And socks don't show up on Zoom meetings or Google meetings or even Teams. So the challenge we have is young salespeople are still largely connecting with older buyers who are at higher levels. And that's going to change over time. But the mannerisms are different. The customs are different. The language is different. You talk to a VP and go, hey there. And years ago, I did some cultural training, cross-border cultural training, and the norms are and you have to know the norms, otherwise you're out. Body language and personal space. And, in Japan, you spend the last 5 minutes of a meeting talking about business.
I spent 6 months in Mexico City when I was running a consulting group. And I can remember calling the customer by apparently a nickname that other coworkers were, calling her by. And somebody yanked me over to the side and said, no, you can't call her that. I'm like, I thought that was just part of her name, I thought that was what we were supposed to do.
Even within the country, I had Microsoft as a client for a long time. And the first time I went to run a large meeting at Microsoft, nobody told me that there's this custom of if you're at a meeting at Microsoft and you decide that this meeting isn't for you, you just get up and leave. So 8 minutes into the meeting, 4 people got up and left. It's like, how rude. No, not culturally. No, not in Redmond. If you decide your time is better spent somewhere else, get out.
Well, so much for the don't make assumptions idea. I'm assuming this isn't going to be worth my time.
Well, so agreement number 2, take nothing personally.
Another good one.
So let's talk about sales enablement. Tell us about the journey, right? So first you created a tool for yourself, and then, so I'll interrupt myself. I used to be very active in the reseller community and found this fabulous t-shirt, which totally encompassed the reseller mindset. And it was from a distillery and bar in Cave Creek, Arizona. We drink all we can, we sell the rest.
Guinness used to have these great commercials with these little, South Park-like looking, cutout picture people that reminds me of that sort of humor and advertising and positioning and brand and all that.
So you created this capability for yourself, and then your best friends drag you kicking and screaming into the commercial space. It's like, I just want to sell stuff.
Running a company is a very different scenario, especially, in a market that is so crowded with sales tools and sales hype and, and the level of, the thing that's really interesting this is probably one of my biggest lessons I've taken away, always able to sell technologies that hadn't existed before to generally the last 20 years was Wall Street customers, but fairly discerning buyers, right? But I've never sold to a sales organization before. I've just been in them, right? The thing I didn't appreciate, we have go-to-market conversations on other podcasts I'm on all the time. And, the thing that I think is missing from the models out there is sort of the organization that you're trying to sell into. Your ICP is at the center of that ideal customer profile. And can they consume the thing that you are offering them? And the clutter in the industry is just one of those things. But the other thing about a sales organization is they are on a treadmill, and it seems like somebody just keeps cranking it up just a tiny bit more all the time. And they're also not interrupt driven, but they get a lot of interrupts. So my boss calls me as I'm walking into a meeting, and now I've got to explain to him why I don't have time for this. I'm trying to be on my game for this meeting. And so you've got all of these things sort of fighting for your time and attention.
Thank God for ADHD.
Well, that's why I mentioned if you can reduce the cognitive load earlier, that there's more than enough. And if we could just back that down a little bit, then you'd be freed up to think and pay attention and listen and understand and little things like that.
I feel badly for the heads of the sales leaders today and the heads of revenue operations and revenue enablement, because there are literally 2,000 different tools that someone could consider bringing into a sales organization to help the team be more successful. Yet, at its essence, selling in a non-commodity situation is really conversations between two people. And even in commodity situations, I have a coaching client who sells insurance to businesses, all sorts of business type insurance. And he said, our stuff is the same as the next person's stuff and the next person's stuff. The difference is the human factor. And so you've got a very particular area of focus with SpotLogic. And for me, I think that focus is spot on, as it were. Sorry.
No, I would love to be the Kleenex of sales enablement. So if I could TM spot on, I would love to do it.
The reason I say that is I believe that discovery should be pervasive across the entire engagement. And good discovery is not one way. Most discovery is designed for the sales team to determine the facts and figures so they can use that against the customer, right? In putting together, an offer. And the alternate view of discovery is what Gerhard Schwantner calls co-creation, which is literally the parties getting together to bring shared knowledge, their individual expertise together and creating something that neither party could do on their own.
I couldn't agree more. To me, that's what's going to be left of sales once anything that can be automated is automated. And, I was asked to give a quote when I was sponsoring NISC, and I'm like, quote? I don't have a quote. So I sat there and thought about it for a minute. I said, well, if I had to boil all of this down, I'd say that, customers buy from the reps who understand them best. Sort of the difference between, you've got all these books behind you, and I've got books on the side of me and that side of me and in the other room. And I can't remember 99.99% of any of the stuff that I've read multiple times, right? It's still somewhere up there that I don't have instant recall of, right? That's why I sort of built a tool. When I first came up with this sort of approach, I sort of took a first principles approach. Like, what's the root cause of why somebody isn't being successful? Okay, well then let's go solve that. And for me, that was understanding the customer. That's the basis of all strategy, the basis of all next best actions. It's the foundation of everything that comes after that, right?
It's necessary, but not nearly sufficient.
Right. So, there's one of the books, I'm sure that's on your shelf. I won't mention it because I know you love the authors, but like the whole book just read like they assumed that you had all the information you needed. And so then you should take this strategy. I'm like, I work really hard at this job and I don't have any of the information I need, let alone like I can just go like, so there's this huge gap between sort of what the customer knows and what I know. And I need to understand what's in, not only, it's not just one buyer anymore. That's the other thing. It's not like I'm having a conversation with one other person and I can sell something in these solutions.
If Don Miguel Ruiz was a Texan, he'd say, go ahead, sucker, make my day, make an assumption. No, if you go in thinking you know everything, you're bound to crash and burn.
Back to the book thing was like, if I was going to write a book on sales for everything I've learned, I could get it down to one sentence, which is, it's very difficult to win a deal as an outsider looking in. And to me, that's the difference between somebody who's got insider status. That's the turning point where it becomes you're mutually discovering things together. Before that, the customer is keeping you out. It's essentially a test. Who is it I want to spend my time with? Because I don't have time to give equal time to 3, 4, 5, however many vendors. I've got to figure out the person that I feel like understands us best, because that's the framework that they need to help us be successful. Because especially in solution sales, we have to go implement this thing next. So we're looking for an outcome. We're not looking for a transaction or a product or.
That's a failing of most selling plans. Of most salespeople never see what implementation looks like. The sales team believes the hard work is done when the contract is signed. The customer knows the hard work starts when the contract is signed. And really good salespeople understand what happens during the initial building of the platform, the adoption, and so in the trough of despair, as Gartner calls it. The book over my right shoulder, will it make the boat go faster? That's the only question that buyers should be asking. Will this help us or hurt us? Is this a carbon fiber or is it an anchor?
The way that I think about it is the sales tools in the past, which is why, most sales reps avoid using most sales tools, is because it doesn't do anything for them or ironically the customer, right? They're all sort of so internally focused, that like I'm trying to qualify this deal or, manage a pipeline or manage my activity or blah, 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 blah. The customer doesn't look at an opportunity, a potential revenue-bearing event. That's how sales organizations look at it, right? That's from Tom Siebel's lips, right? The customer is looking at the complex, high-risk decision. And then, as you said, implementation. Like their job is on the line in significant deals. So if you've got this sort of, internal sales, medic approach to qualifying this deal, and the sales qualification methodologies came out of BANT, which came out of IBM in the 60s, and it was because IBM was the only company with computers, and they wanted to make sure their sales reps weren't wasting time with smaller fish. We've got a market to dominate, and let somebody else sell to these guys that can't buy a lot from us. We are not there anymore.
My good friend Jeff Lipsius, who's an author and an expert on sales, says the purpose of selling is not selling, it's buying. And if you take that to heart, it forces you to move around the other side of the table and say, how can I help you with this? As opposed to, how do I do this to you?
Right. So from adversarial to collaborative or cooperative or co-creation.
And that's the essence of the findings of Dixon and McKenna in the Jolt effect. Customers are all about risk management, and it used to be fear of missing out. That's the boom times. Now it's organizational risk and personal risk of, I don't know how to make this decision so that things come out well. It's the job of the salesperson to say, here's how other people have made this decision. Here's the change management required. Here's what things will look like if you do these 3 things.
And so what you're describing is the collective expertise of a company being applied to help a customer make a decision. And I think that's another place where sales tools in the past have completely lagged. I mean, I've worked for some great companies, really well-managed companies, but there hasn't been one since NCR. We had meetings every Monday night after work. All they did was does Pete know what Jeff is doing over here? Does Jeff know what Bill is doing? Where are the successes? Where are the failures? What are we up against? And so we were all learning from one another, and it was mandatory, but it was fun.
It's that sharing of tribal knowledge.
And I haven't worked for a company since then that did anything other than forecast calls where you're supposed to spit out something valuable and everybody else is just DMing one another like, I can't believe he's going through this, BS again and all. The difference between forecast calls and what we used to do is night and day. Like everybody made the club in our organization. And now even at Salesforce, only 40% of them make the trip.
I help a lot of reps prep for QBRs. The goal of a QBR is to get out fast, right? The goal of the QBR for a rep is not have anything written down for follow-up, right? The response should be, this person has it handled. Next. Right? So tell the story, get out. And then I always ask this question: what gift are you going to give to your peers, right? What learning are you going to share that worked for you? Because I want them to be sharing that same tribal knowledge you talked about that just isn't shared very much anymore.
That's a cultural thing. It speaks to the quality of management and the reliance numbers as opposed to intelligence, that intuition that we were talking about earlier.
So let's get back to discovery. What does discovery mean to you, Pete?
I think that, like I said before, you can imagine a picture of what's in my head and what's in the client's head, and there being this massive gap. I need to close that gap to get to a critical mass of understanding. So customers only have so much tolerance until you reach that point where they flip and you're now the insider. Back to your jolt effect. In my mind, when deals start to stall, it's because essentially you've lost the deal, but you don't know it yet. So you're being sort of dragged along for the procurement group or some other, it's not for the buyer anymore, but the insider is getting way more information than anybody. And it's because now the customer has decided that you're the person they want to buy from. And the more they tell you, the more likely it is that the customers are going to be successful in getting what they want. And so, discovery, aside from this critical mass and sort of this balance in when things are going to happen, it's a race. And the race, you have a lead. The race is on to get to that insider position, because if you don't and somebody else does, there's no way you're going to win that deal. The insider would have to just not be able to do what the customer needs. I've got a good friend of mine, a former old boss at Teradata, who sold billions of dollars of Teradata, him and his team over the years. And he said, we've got this fantastic product, but, other companies have got fantastic products too. They might be different from our fantastic product, but they're fantastic in a different way. Maybe they're easier to use or easier to install or whatever it is. And this guy said, the way a team makes a big decision like that can be as important, if not more important, than the actual decision they make, right? Which goes back to the value of understanding the customer well enough to be in a position to be critical to their success. So you, as a salesperson, you want to be integral to the decision process itself, which means this insider status and this cooperation and collaboration, which you have to earn that spot.
That's right. I presented at a Sales 3.0 Sales and Enablement Summit last week. One of the other presenters, Marianne Vanella, shared this finding: 84% of enterprise deals die in the first meeting, right? So first meeting, you're done. You may not know it for months. The carcass of that deal may be dragged on for months.
Well, my CTO is a former customer of mine. He was the CTO at Goldman Sachs. I mean, I sold him for a couple of years and his team. And when he's on a call with, a potential client of ours, that's basically the first thing he says is, we are evaluating whether, because, Goldman is a very well-run company with teams that work really well together. Again, that's a cultural thing. So Carl has to assemble these guys for a meeting with a vendor. So every one of the people in the room is a very smart, very hardworking, 70, 80-hour week kind of people, and you're asking for some of their time. And if the person, coming in from the vendor side isn't adding value, they're not going to get another meeting. He will tell you that, you're done. Right. There's not enough value here to have you back. There's no second chances.
At least he tells them up front. It's like the entire Microsoft team gets up and walks out of the meeting. We're done.
Right. Sometimes you can't tell they just did that mentally, but that's exactly what happens. That's right.
And so it's the preparation ahead of the meeting. For me, the single most important attribute for a rep is curiosity. I want them to be curious. I want them to be thinking about the individual. I want them to be thinking about the organization and their goals and all of that, and to show up with that curiosity as opposed to a script or an agenda.
I couldn't agree more.
Agendas are important, but it's got to be the customer's agenda. And it's perfectly okay to go off script.
I think you have to. It's like back to the Mike Tyson quote, everybody's got a strategy until they get smacked in the face. right? And you've got to be responsive in the moment, but that's no reason to not be as prepared as you can be given the treadmill you're on and all the other interrupts and all the people coming after your time. Whatever you can do to be as prepared as possible so that you can pivot in a meeting.
And that ability to pivot, that awareness of the opportunity to pivot is critical. None of the 5 finalists pivoted to join Michael on the same side of the table. Oh my gosh, it sounds like you've got an important meeting this afternoon. Let's forget about talking about this contract. Let's talk about how I can help you be ready for that meeting. If anyone had gone that route, they would have likely gotten the deal. They were so mission focused. They haven't had the experience of pivoting many, many times. They were so mission focused. All of them missed that interruption that happened of emergency board meeting to talk about the sales situation. And a more senior salesperson might have said, okay, let's put all this aside. How can we help?
Well, I think just to take their side for a second, I think the other thing that may have contributed to that is that this sales cycle took place over an 18-hour period or something. They're literally sort of going from one meeting to another. If they had been going through a sales cycle that spanned weeks or months, I think you would be in a groove where I've been here long enough, I keep meeting with people, and so I've got the right to act like a partner or the permission to act like a partner, as opposed to, I mean, I certainly felt it in the context of everything is a gate, and I've got to get through this gate to survive. So it's more like a Hunger Games kind of a thing in a contest as opposed to a real sales cycle. But that brings up another point that I think dovetails with something you were saying earlier, is that I get to work with a lot of fantastic people. Another one is a guy named Michael Fawcett, he used to run research for IDC for 10 or 15 years, and then at G2, he had the same.
Mike and I used to work together.
Oh, really? Okay. So he and I do a podcast together, and one of the things he and I wrote a paper on this, one of his big beliefs is that the idea of a sales process and the customer journey and journey mapping and that sort of thing, his view is the customer doesn't follow your sales process. Not one of them is interested in what phase they're in or any of that. Again, they're looking at complex, high-risk decision. That's their lens. Their lens isn't, sales process lens or activity lens or any of that, right? So, I mean, it's, we're sort of, with the approach that we've taken to tools and culture and training, it's no wonder there's a disconnect between buyers and sellers, because sellers are being coached to focus on the wrong stuff and are being managed by tools that change their behavior, but in a way that yields conformity, as opposed to getting off script and, the customer just said something that is really critical. That was one of my first complaints about how AI was being rolled out to salespeople to begin with. Was I did this transcription thing for a number of times, and okay, give me the summary. And just the dynamics, and maybe they've solved this, but initially it was always lopping off the most important thing that was talked about, because it was only said once and maybe it was said at the end. And so there wasn't this history of, this is what I care about. So, if you're just trying to placate management, fine, use that summary. Yep, we had a meeting, check the box, I'm doing 3 calls a day or whatever. But we're missing the key piece of information that is the key to our strategy when you try and replace sort of critical thinking with summaries. What was the possible advantage of that? I don't get it.
It's funny you say that, Pete. Some of my most memorable conversations in sales came from a total surprise. I was sitting next to a very senior person at Pfizer. I was one of the managers of the key account team at Oracle that called on Pfizer. I didn't have an individual product responsibility. And she turned to me and she said, "What's your role on the team?" Because everyone else had gone around saying, "I sell databases, I sell middleware, I sell CRM, I sell this, I sell that," right? And she looked at me, she said, "What do you do?" And without even thinking, I said, "I'm here to fix your issue of prescription adherence." And she looked at me, she said, "What?"
We actually need that.
Yeah, that's a 50% revenue game changer.
Yeah, so you talked about the what you do versus the how we do whatever it is that the what is. Yeah, we apply a database or this or that, and we can create a solution for you. But yeah, without the what, who cares?
Yeah, and on that same thread, I had a conversation with the CEO of a services firm, and we were offering to help him refocus his organization. He said to me, "I think I'm going to have my internal team take a swing at that." And without thinking, and I do this frequently, I frequently talk without thinking, as people on the podcast know. I said, "Well, your internal team has already done that once. How'd that work out?" And he and I both knew the answer to that. I'll never forget it. I was standing at a payphone on the side of the road up in New Hampshire. I was having this conversation with him. It just burst out of me, and it was exactly the right thing to ask. And I heard this sadness in his voice of, I know, but I'm already too far down the path. And 3 months later, he called me back and said, go. You don't rehearse those things. You don't research those things. You need to know enough you need to be enough ingrained in the customer's world that you can actually have that conversation and do it authentically.
Right. Exactly. Like, so without that knowledge of that previous catastrophe, what have you got? You would have locked out. He wouldn't have called you 3 months later. As you start to peel back the onion of understanding the customer, like, it's everything. Back to that Teradata guy, I said, discovery is the most important part of the job in complex sales. And he goes, no, it is the job. So, yeah, obviously it's not the whole job, but like that was his point, is like, no, you don't understand how important it is if you think it's part of the job.
A lot of people think discovery is one of those chambers in the submarine that has to be gone through, like the Sandler sales methodology. It's like, no, discovery starts from long before you ever talk to someone and continues long after agreement is signed. You should be in discovery every minute of every conversation. You should always be open to learning something new and piecing it together so that you get a better and better sense of what's going on in that environment and how can you as a third party help make the boat go faster, help improve their results. And by the way, here's a little tidbit. I have a client who calls on hospitals. And we were shooting the shit talking about big swings. We just happened to come up on a topic of what's the second most common thing that people do in hospitals that's a total waste of time. The first thing they do is they wash hands, which is important. That's been proven. What's the second most important thing they do in hospitals? Or not important, sorry, most common thing they do. We played with that for a bit. We calculated, right? Back of the envelope calculation, this particular hospital with 4,500 employees spends 1,000 hours a day doing it. And that could be dropped with technology that you and I use every day, which might save the hospital $12 million a year, plus improve employee satisfaction. So he's going to take that hypothesis to the hospital and say, hey, here's something I've been thinking about, right? The hospital never called him and said, hey, we want to solve this problem. We want to make people more productive or less burdened.
There's a great other example of an organization on a treadmill. The stakes are higher and it's, even more complex potentially. And, the people who are giving the care at the high end may not be that good with other human beings because they're so damn smart. And so, so that's another environment where if you're going to change that environment, you've got to be able to sort of graft yourself onto what's going on in flight to get adopted. So that's the other part of that. It's not just that they have room for improvement in some spot. It's, can you improve them in flight given the givens? So I was, back in the day when I was selling to Goldman Sachs, we had been very successful with this one project. And so I was able to call on other people fairly easily with this strong sponsorship that I had. And I got this meeting with a guy that reported to that same CTO, but was in charge of a whole other area of Goldman. And I said, what do you think about replacing this thing that you've got from this one great big company with our stuff for that purpose? I'm like, I think that, like you've got $20 million worth of stuff. You could do it with $1 million worth of our stuff. And he goes, essentially, okay, you're on our side of the table, so I'll just tell you, rather than treat you like a vendor. And he takes me through the math of porting 2,200 mission critical apps from one platform to another and how long that would take given the way that they have to ensure that stuff works before they start trading stocks with it or whatever, And I was like, oh my God, you can't change the current infrastructure.
The risk and the human cost is dramatically higher than the simple cost savings.
Just because there's a reason to buy doesn't mean that they are in a position where they could even adopt the best idea ever, because it's not just about the thing. It's about this operation.
So Pete, where do you see the company going over the next year or two? What's your dream for the organization? Where do you think SpotLogic's going to go?
We have this opportunity because of some decisions that we made. I think in hindsight, it was just we fell on the right side of the beam, like we could have gone either side with the same amount of justification for either one, and we just happened to get lucky. I see this evolution of this tool that can help salespeople be more valuable to buyers to this tool being used by decision makers for collaboration internally. And so this opens up a much larger market for us in the form of decision making, complex decision making in general, with multiple stakeholders. And like, you would know this better than me for sure, but like in the partner world, the channel world, the reseller world, there are, and especially nowadays with companies like G2 out there and other sources and communities and marketplaces, there's a lot of other companies that touch the process of making a decision now than just the vendor. In fact, G2 did a survey. 68% of B2B buyers don't contact a salesperson until after they've made a purchase decision, which is an existential threat to the profession of selling. And that goes back to how much value have you been creating for the buyer, and why would they do? If you're not creating any more than the alternatives, then why take time and effort to meet with you? So anyway, is more rationale behind the idea of they're not looking at this as a sales process, and I'm in different places there, and I've graduated from one step to another. And then you factor in the fact that there are so many different stakeholders that are involved. Almost by definition, they're not going to agree with each other. Like, they have different roles. They have different mandates. They have different concerns. So, the real value that a salesperson can bring to the table is to help as a third party sort of bring that alignment together, right? To the extent that SpotLogic could be used to sort of bring in these partners that are maybe here for part of the journey, but not all of it. So you might not even be aware they're looking at something, but these 2 or 3 other firms are. And then there's some vendors involved. And then there's going to be some partners to potentially implement it. And, this information model, if you will, becomes the only sort of, permanent thing, even though it's changing all the time, but it's there. It's like, here's the information that goes with this process of making this complex decision. My goal would be to have our platform be as easy to, interact with and share information with and collaborate with, on a specific decision as it is to work with today as just a single rep who's trying to figure out what to say in this meeting, and he's only got 5 seconds to prepare, as opposed to the 50 minutes that he wanted. I told this story at NISC. One of my sons is a sales guy. And, I think he's better than I'll ever be. He's like, Dad, I've got 3 critical meetings today. I prepared 3 hours for one of them, and I'm going to have to wing the other 2. There isn't enough time to do what I feel like I need to do when you start to multiply the number of meetings. And so that's where SpotLogic is starting, is just helping sales reps solve that one problem. Can I show up so that I can be at my best in every interaction? If I got some help that's here's the things to ask in this meeting, given what we already know for this particular deal and what we know, this collective expertise is most effective in this context, this situation.
That's great. Fascinating journey. I'm looking forward to following you as you're on that journey. It's important. The buyers of the world who have problems to resolve, opportunities to take advantage of, they need the help of the organizations providing products and services. But unless there's good conversation and good engagement, it's not going to happen. So, Pete, where can people find you?
At pete@spotlogic.com.
This has been a fascinating conversation. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, Lee. It's been great.
Thanks, Pete.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Another deep dive into the topic of sales excellence and the performance mindset. If you found this conversation interesting, I would appreciate it if you would share the podcast with a coworker or 2. And to explore this topic in more depth, send me a note via the contact form on podcast.thoughtsonselling.com, or find some time for us to talk at meet.acellergroup.com. Thanks.